Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining our September DevOps 101 Back to Basics AMA. I'm really excited to have a great panel in front of us that will introduce themselves in just a few moments. I want to run through a couple of logistics first and foremost, and also welcome everybody who's joining us today for this discussion. The focus really this month was built on everybody going back to school. And so what we want to discuss today is some of the fundamentals and basics related to DevOps. So a couple of quick reminders first and foremost. First of all, ShuttleOps is excited to be announcing something on October 6th. You can see the countdown clock here. If you go to shuttleops.io, you'll see that we have a countdown clock if for no other reason, reminding all of our developers that they need to be ready by October 6th. But if you are interested in staying up to date with what we are releasing on October 6th, which we're very, very excited about, please go ahead and go to shuttleops.io. Put your email address in the box designated, and we will be excited to welcome you into the announcement on October 6th. Also, a couple quick reminders. We did last month launch a new product tour, including 100% free AWS credentials. So if you want to get started with ShuttleOps today, you can go to app.shuttleops.io. We have a very simplified integrated walkthrough that sort of leads you through the steps that you need to take to create, build, and deploy pipelines. And like I said, we include free to AWS credentials. So even if you don't want to spend the money deploying to your cloud, you can deploy to ours and just try out the functionality. So I encourage everybody to check that out today. You can find that via the link here or at shuttleops.io as well. And then one more thing. We are continuing this overall sequence of AMA roundtables next month. The next one will be approximately 1 month from today on October 23rd. We're going to cover containers and how that fits into your DevOps strategy and really go deep on your questions related to containers, how that might pertain, how that might help. So if you're interested in that, please go and register today. We'll send out this link in a reminder email after this call. One more thing. Our expert panel of people have put together a really interesting link of DevOps 101 resources. Heidi and Jan and Skylar have all contributed sort of links to helpful resources on the internet that you might find helpful to continue sort of the learning and discussion that we have underway today. So with that, I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to introduce themselves. And so let's go ahead and talk. I'm going to go ahead and call on JJ first. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and then call on the next person when you're done.
Sounds good. Hi, everybody. I'm JJ Asgar. I'm a developer advocate for the IBM Cloud. And I have a lot of friends on this call, which is really cool. And I'm excited to help out this conversation. And if you ever do need to get in contact with me, as I always say this, I do have the email address of awesome@ibm.com. If you know anything about IBM, that is a really, really big deal because the email addresses at IBM are infamously bad. Lupo.
Hey everyone, Ricardo Lupo. I lead our SE organization over at LogDNA. Also great to see friends working together here and having discussions around DevOps and how we can help the community at large grow their own personal brand and how they can really get involved in sort of this kind of modern way of doing work. So Jason, thank you again for the invite and looking forward to the discussion.
Call on the next person.
Heidi.
There you go.
Hi, I'm Heidi Waterhouse. I'm a developer advocate at LaunchDarkly. We do feature flags as a service. I'm excited to come here and talk about this because I love the DevOps community and I think that there's some really interesting things coming out of it as it continues to mature. Also, I have a cricket in my background in case you think you're going crazy. It's not you, it's me.
All right, call the next person.
Yep, Jan.
Hi everybody, my name is Jonathan. I work at ShuttleOps. Right now, I help various clients in different industries, all the way from the e-commerce industry to the restaurant industry, And before that, I was managing self-managed Kubernetes clusters in the health tech industry. So lots of infrastructure background, and I'm just happy to be here today and talk about all things DevOps from the perspective of an operator and somebody who does a lot of consulting in DevOps. And I'm going to call out Skylar.
Hey everyone, I'm Steli Lane, Senior DevOps Specialist at ShuttleOps. I work with customers on the technology side of DevOps and see what we can do to help them succeed. I'm going to call on Carl.
You're muted, Carl.
Failed at the first hurdle. Yeah, sorry guys. My name's Carl Bourne. I'm from Vanify. I'm part of the sort of global solutions architect team. So I sort of overlay some of our solutions architects and things and help them with sort of some of the DevOps related topics that sort of often, or not more often now, come up in some of the larger organizations that we work with. Glad to be part of this event.
Cool, thank you. And I'm not going to tease you about the city background like I said I was going to do, but I am going to remind the people that are on the Zoom call right now. We will, for everybody that submitted a question prior to the start of this, as well as those attending right now, if you have a question, please feel free to use either the chat window or the Q&A function in Zoom. I'll be monitoring that throughout the call and sort of feeding that into our panelists. So if you have a question that's top of mind and you want to have something covered, or you want more specifics about something that's been said or discussed along the way, please feel free to drop that in the chat window or the Q&A function. I'll make sure that I surface those along the way. So thanks, panel. We've got a really diverse background here. And, you know, I was thinking about how to kick this off. And I thought, gosh, you know, we kind of branded this about back to school, right? It's September, people are going back to school, people are kicking off a new school year. So if you were you and you were giving advice to somebody sort of starting off on their DevOps journey, and imagine that you had, you know, a full year ahead of you to sort of like learn and intake knowledge and learn all that was necessary in that year. What is one piece of advice you might give yourself if you were sort of looking back at yourself at the start point of your DevOps journey? Something that maybe you wish you had known then that now you know, have learned throughout the years, or just a piece of guidance that you think is really relevant to people starting out on their DevOps journey in a one-on-one basis or in a one-on-one basis. And that's an open question. So first person to ring in gets the spoils.
I think that one of the things that has happened in DevOps is it's very easy to be like, DevOps. I think I would tell myself to spend 3 months as a junior administrator trying to run servers and figure out DNS and connect things together. Because if you don't have the pain of that experience, it's really hard to be sympathetic about it when you're doing it on a massive scale.
That's awesome. Okay, what else?
I think I'll take the next part of it, Jason. I think the other side, from the personal aspect of it, just kind of sharing my own experience around it. Failing is okay. Learning from failure is important, and knowing that there is no like big bang panacea, you know, perfect world. There's experiments and there's learning and there's growing and there's iterating and there's collaboration. And so the more you can kind of remove that almost that imposter syndrome, which I know is something for me that's very real, that I try to deal with almost on a daily basis. Getting out of that vein and really starting to just understand that experiments are good. I want to get feedback, and based on feedback, it's going to inform the next thing I can do. So as much as you can, again, embrace that and then help others, bring others along around that journey. I think it's something that kind of really embodies the core of DevOps, outside of, you know, the tooling that might be in the space or how people might define what DevOps is.
Yeah. I love the hand raising. I wish this happened at my dinner table, by the way. Go ahead, JJ.
So I actually came into the DevOps world the opposite way than Heidi was implying, how she came in from the dev to the ops. I came from the ops to the dev. And it was, for me, the idea of developing code was weird to me. SSHing into a box to change something, not using configuration management was a hurdle, because there's a whole, to me, it was on the other side of that wall. I wish I had learned to embrace the different ways of doing things earlier. And also I had to learn to kind of what Whippo was saying, start small, really start small and grow. And it's to pair it again, what Whippo said, it's a journey. It doesn't happen overnight, and it becomes a way to get the velocity you want with just a little bit of effort.
Anything else? Like I saw a lot of hand, and somebody said drink as much coffee as possible. No one needs to raise their hand, by the way. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, so I would sort of say don't sort of overuse the word or the term DevOps. So, I mean, just because, you know, you're using, I don't know, a tool that's used or commonly used by sort of DevOps practitioners doesn't mean to say you're actually doing DevOps. I mean, you know, we have many customers that I speak to, and they're using Puppet or Chef or some of these tools. And when you really look at what they're doing, it's like, well, you're just using it or misusing it as a tool to do something. You're not really doing it sort of properly, and, you know, you're not really following the methodology properly, combining your developer and operational teams. So that's sort of what I see quite often out there in the field.
Yeah, you know, you hit on an interesting point, which is, you know, I've had a couple of different chats with people about this. DevOps, machine learning, AI, there are all these kind of like fancy umbrella terms that describe, you know, a set of like, you know, like a fundamental approach to just looking at things a different way, right? Like, you know, combining how you work together as a team, combining how you instrument and measure, and how you sort of ultimately, you know, deploy it. But like the end goal is really, you know, for all of us, I don't think there's a single person in this panel or on this call, the end goal is, you know, with DevOps is getting your thing done faster so that like you deliver value in the form of the app, right? Like, and reducing the complexity of that, and reducing the failures, and just getting you through that process a little bit faster. Similarly, you know, DevOps as a cultural practice has like some norms that sort of associate themselves with it. And I'll just go ahead and hand raise and say, as preparing for this panel, I learned about a new term yesterday called calms. Who would like, well, and several people are encouraging beer and coffee as sort of associated with DevOps. So feel free to filter that into your answers. But yeah, who can tell me a little bit about well, yeah, Carl, by the way, is joining us from the UK, so it's literally like 9 o'clock at night for him. So he's welcome to have a beer. But who can tell me a little bit about the sort of, you know, fundamental sort of you know, things related to DevOps that might be important to consider, whether that's in the CALMS framework or otherwise?
Maybe I can just go. Oh, sorry, JJ.
Oh, Skylar, please.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just go ahead and describe what comms means, just to start off. Like, maybe some people on the call aren't familiar with the term. So comms is an acronym usually described. I believe it's from the Phoenix project, and it's really about like some of the portions of DevOps that are places to start and how they come together. So really, the first letter of comms is C, and that's culture. How in your organization do you foster a culture of, like Lupo said, failure? Like, how do you treat failure? Is it seen as a negative or positive thing? A would deal with automation, and that's really where the tooling fits in. One thing that's really important to point out is DevOps doesn't mean tools. It's an overarching discussion, right? It's how you can help your organization deliver value at velocity. L would lean in towards, that's funny, would be what is lean, and it's like business process really, or how you as developers or operations work. M is measurement, not only metrics and monitoring, but how the work you're doing impacts the business as well. And S stands for sharing, how building like a center of excellence and sharing the information that you learn and other places that the organization can be helpful, right?
Well, I mean, you did a great job. Like, what are some of the challenges like you face in any one of those areas that people that are starting out sort of doing DevOps should, you know, sort of watch out for? And what are some of the things that sort of help, you know, sort of drive success?
I'll go.
Well, sorry.
Um,
This is why we were raising hands. One of the things, I come from 20 years of technical writing, and one of the things I've learned is that sharing is a non-trivial problem. You have to have an agreed upon place to put things that you share not only as a team, but as an organization. And you have to have some kind of incentive or disincentive structure to make people do it, because it feels like extra work. It isn't, it's core to being able to like ever go on vacation, but it's really hard for people to remember to do. So I think that one of the things that comes last and people think of last is sharing and how to do that effectively.
Yeah. Jan, you were going to say something as well.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say the culture piece and the measurement piece are like when you look at the CALMS acronym, you can sort of describe in an organization an engineering department with some DevOps specialists and maybe a VP of engineering who, you know, ties it back to the business. And you just need to be able to really know how to communicate effectively. So within your engineering department, for if you're like a DevOps specialist or engineer in your department, and you have full stack engineers who are depending on you, you know, through great pipelines to deliver their code, you really need to be able to, you know, show insight into what you're doing, which is, this taps into what Heidi was saying, that you really have to have an incentive structure to actually be able to do that instead of just doing your job. And you need to have a good relationship with the stakeholders. So you could, because they're going to be the ones doing the OKRs for, you know, the department, for the organization. It's all part of a bigger picture. And, you know, being a good communicator, you know, allows you to do that as part of your role if you're a DevOps engineer. Now the bigger question is you know, how do you actually do that when at the end of the day everybody just wants to do their job, right? Like, not you can have a lunch and learn and show them all the cool DevOps tooling and how the pipeline looks like, and people do enjoy it. People like who are full stack engineers, I think they like being part of the broader ecosystem. You know, there is a little bit of a, you know, an elite feeling when, you know, you're a full stack engineer who also knows a little bit about Kubernetes and knows how to, you know what is the new hot things in the industry today. A lot of people won't care too much about that either, and that's up to them. But really aligning the organization is key, and I think that the CALMS acronym actually breaks down like the people in the picture.
I love the hand raising. I'm going to institute this as a standard for go forward roundtables. Yes, everybody hand raise. Go ahead, JJ.
To kind of play off of what Jan was saying, the cultural change of a DevOps movement sometimes starts at the ground level, right? It sometimes comes from the ground up, but the challenge is you need the overarching management to also buy into it. Back to Jan's point about doing your job, there's a change there that needs to be bought in by everybody. I personally have worked at a company in a previous life where I was trying to make the DevOps change at the small startup I was at. And I had actual like friction from above me. And I had to prove by going through what typically was Herculean efforts to make those changes happen, to work with that. The reason why I mention it is because other people will find that problem. They'll be like, oh, the grass is greener on the DevOps side. We need to go there. Let's do that thing. And management's like, we need to make money. Stop talking, kind of thing, right? So you need to find a way to break those walls down. And sometimes, to Jan's point, it's the lunch and learn, showing off a cool technology, being like, if we just implement this portion, it's the typical strangler pattern with everything, where you just find little bits and pieces you can shave off. And before you know it, you have that whole pipeline.
You know, and sorry, Carl, then Lupo. I'm going to call on you last, Lupo, just because.
Yeah, so to add to that and sort of pick out the word friction, and you know, I come across a lot of friction between DevOps teams and InfoSec teams in large organizations. So quite often, you know, the InfoSec teams are very much, you know, try and avoid the word sort of old school, but essentially, you know, the traditional PKI teams have been doing it their way for many years, and then you guys come along as developers, and you've got all these cool, you know, fancy ways of doing it. You've got the, you know, the eyes and ears of the business because you're delivering technology that makes the business, you know, ultimately profitable. So, you know, generally InfoSec, you know, get very confused and upset and worried that they're going to lose control, and, you know, all the things that they've traditionally done, they're not going to be able to do. So the advice really, I think, from, you know, Venafi's perspective is, you know, try and help those teams understand what it is you're doing, and sort of coerce them into this new world, because it will make your life a lot easier. And, you know, ultimately, if you can get them to the point where they can take their services to you and you can integrate those services seamlessly, you know, you guys then don't have to worry about, you know, the things that InfoSec would ordinarily do. And, you know, you'll find then they won't get in your way as much, and they'll be a lot more accommodating to the cause.
All right, Lupo, go.
Two points I think I wanted to follow up on. I think, Carl, from your perspective, you make a great point, and I think it dovetails into the sharing or the challenge with sharing. I think if you go into this journey with a kind of closed mind, it becomes very, very challenging for you to really grow as your own self, and then also grow as your team grows, or as you start to get success and really understand and learn from that feedback. But that empathy and that vulnerability, I think from a personal growth perspective, it's something that I've struggled with in my career, and it's something that I have to actively work on. It's something from a perspective of leading teams I try to project, right? Because ultimately you want the teams to be driving the right behaviors that will drive the right work, that will ultimately lead to the outcomes that we all want to talk about, right? The successes of DevOps and how we release faster and how we make more money because we can get more releases out there. But there, you know, it's not binary, right? It's not a means to an end. You have to have all of those things really lined up. And I think to that point, right, as you share and are not afraid to share and not afraid to be vulnerable and show, okay, look, you know, we did this, we had these successes, we had these failures, we're going to learn from these failures by doing X, Y, Z. That will help drive some of that behavior and culture change that you need to be successful. I think the other side of it is from the leadership perspective, and this kind of dovetails into one of the open questions that we have in the open Q&A. Leadership has to be aligned, and they have to think about, like, this is kind of my call to action for all the leaders that are out there, right, in the industry. Think about how you want to drive behavior in your team. Do you want to be top down? Do you want to be task driven? Or do you want to elevate and help bring up the people that are actually doing the work day to day? How do you help them be better? What are the things that you can provide to them? How do you help unblock them, rather than always being in their way? And you don't think about it being in their way because you think, oh, well, I'm doing my job being a manager because I'm making sure my people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. The challenge out there is, what I'm going to say is, okay, how are you actually making your team better? Because it's not about you anymore, right? You're in a leadership position. So what things are you doing? What behaviors are you driving? And what things are you helping your teams do that are going to make them better, right? Which is ultimately going to make you better as a leader.
Yeah, I mean, I think about that, like, there's a couple of, like, points I would distill from all of the comments that were just made, which is, like, number one, you know, the sort of endpoint nirvana is not something instantly achievable overnight. And there's, you know, stepwise progress that must be made. And sort of, you know, potentially the best way to do that is to look at your, you know, one is lowest hanging fruit. Number two is where you have support and encouragement from a leadership role. Number three is where you have built-in capability sort of existing within the organization to tackle the challenge. And so those are sort of three different directions that you could go. We get a lot of questions actually in these roundtables from people who are passionate about DevOps, but, you know, are in sort of an IC level role where they see that, like, gosh, this process isn't quite working the way that we want it to, or, oh, we're not quite breaking down the handoffs between development, let's assume security's in there, let's hope, and operations. And so like, I guess, again, DevOps 101, if you're an IC sort of working at a company trying to like sort of make the case, what would you say to those people? It's sort of the inverse of what Ricardo. I've never called you Ricardo. Lupo was just.
They both work. They both work. Jason, that's fine.
I've known Lupo for a long time. I've never called him Ricardo in my life. But if you were to sort of like, for those people that may just be starting out in this, like, what would you encourage those people to do in terms of success strategies if they want to, get their company on the right foot and get going? This hand raising thing is throwing me off. Skylar, go ahead.
Hey, it's back to school. What do you do at school? You raise your hand, right?
Yeah, totally.
I think
Fair
it's
enough.
bad stuff. Yeah, so one of the things that I think has been really effective in my experience, at least helping some teams make that first potential leap, is just at least get some kind of maybe permission from management to at least do some level of like POC of maybe a particular technology that you find interesting. Show them how that tool can be leveraged, and maybe the smallest way to help you do your job better, help someone else do the job better, or save some time for the business that maybe ends up saving some green dollars at the end of the day.
Okay. JJ, I think you were next. We need to have buzzers next time. I think would be appropriate. Go ahead, JJ.
Skylar took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly what I was going to say. But I'd build on it just by saying a little bit more. Trust the bots to do the work for you. Learn to trust the tooling that you are POCing. Obviously, trust but verify. Like if you're gonna do something on a machine, obviously SSH in to make sure it does what you expect to. But learn to trust the process that you're building. And it's again, to reiterate, it's a journey. It's a lot of little bits and pieces over time to get there, but you need to build the trust in what you're doing, and to Lupo's point earlier, also be willing to fail fast and iterate and change if you need.
I have a question for JJ and Lupo.
Okay.
So Lupo, you mentioned that you need to ask yourself, is what I'm going to be doing top down, or am I going to be elevated by working within my team as a manager? Am I going to be elevating the people? Maybe if you're saying this from the perspective of a manager, but perhaps me as a person of a team, am I going to be working with my teammates at our own cadence and being elevated to what we can do, or is everything going to come top down? Right. And so that speaks to me because I made the transition from a sort of top down organization to an organization where we were working at our own cadence, sharing best practices, I really felt cultivated and supported to achieve more than just a task at hand. So, and that felt like we were actually we're doing agile properly, but we were also achieving those best practices. And then, JJ, you were saying, I think you need to actually, I think I may have switched the question. There's a second aspect, I might get back to it later. But Lupo, are you able to achieve that in a small team? Because I felt like I was not able to achieve that in a small team. That was only achievable once I moved to a bigger team, or maybe that was just the cultural practice and the organization that was different. But I know that some people watching this might be in a position where they feel things are top down, they're only getting by, keeping their heads above water. Is this change achievable from a small team, or does there have to be a bigger team in order to get that sort of elevated approach?
So John, that's a great question in terms of like, what type of scale do I need to deal with in order for this to actually be effective? And I think for me, the call out for me was for all the leaders that are out there, right? Or people that are managing teams, like think about how you are actually interfacing and working with your teams, and what are you doing to elevate them, right? So that was kind of the broader, like, okay, like how are leaders in 2020 working with their teams, right? Because there's all these goals and things we want to do. I think from the point of view of your question, the larger teams, you seem, again, and I'm being assumptive here because we don't have more data. I've been able to kind of dig down to like what actually made it successful. But like if I had to make a presumption, the larger teams have bigger problems. And so any change that you make for the better is going to ultimately, and just from a straight math point of view, going to have a larger impact. What I will say is that as you are, say, for example, I'll give you the example of, okay, you've got a team that kind of broadly gets the fact that they all want to work together and be better, and you may or may not have management that's may or may not be aligned. What I'd say in those scenarios is that you learn, you understand exactly where you are, you really sit down and you quantify. It's kind of the A in comms, like assess where you are, measure it. Don't get into subjective battles of, don't use in specific things like this process is broken or things don't work well here, right? Those are vague and specific and unactionable terms that people will, if you're in that top-down environment, are going to very easily shut you down because, well, I'm your manager and I don't think that, so continue on your work. What I would say is learn personally from your own experience, learn with team members who want to come along for the ride. I can tell you that if you're working with a team, you're going to find one or two people that want to make a difference. They just don't know how to do it. When you measure and assess what's happening, you can use very specific, actionable metrics to see how things are working, and then leverage the POC, right? The little proof of concept, those little iterative experiments that show, hey, in this experiment, we showed we were doing this. Here's the difference just by running this experiment. Guess what? If we start to broaden this little proof of concept work into the larger team, we're going to get this incremental value. And then ask, how would you like us to proceed, right? Like put it on the leadership to give you the cue of, okay, yeah, that sounds great. I want you to continue on. That's the way you're going to get successes in those types of organizations. And I think, again, the smaller groups versus larger groups, it's probably just mostly, again, without peeling back the onion and looking at the, the actual problems, you just have larger problems in a larger scale, right? So any little improvement is just always going to be magnified. John, is that aligned to what you were thinking in terms of like a feedback or an observation?
That's a different perspective that I didn't think about. And I think the main challenge in the smaller team was literally just to get management, to get other people to look and see what you're doing, right? Because they're saying you need to show that initial proof of concept. But if nobody's in a bigger team, there's more people, there's probably more eyes on what they're doing. If it's the two guys working in an org that everything falls down on, they might be isolated, they might be siloed, they might not actually get a chance to show what they're working on, and then, like you said, have a proof of concept, expand on it, iterate on it. So that answers it. And actually, I remember how this ties into what David was saying. So you were saying, put your trust in what you're building, put your trust in the bots incrementally. And what I was wondering is, if you're the only person, or if you're one of two people who are responsible for something and you're isolated, like if that thing breaks, it feels like the blame would fall on you or one other person at most, rather than, this is something for the team to work together on, right? So I was wondering if that's inherently specific to like small teams. But based on Lupo's answer, once you have management on board, once you break that silo down, whether you're 2 people, whether you're 5 or 10 people, that's when you can start, as an organization, place trust in the automated system, right? And that's really important, because in the same way that the lean and measurement, in comms requires you to go to your manager and ask them for the OKRs, right? There's also the whole idea of risk management, right? So you want people to be on board with the automated system that you're building, and you can't do that without breaking down that silo.
Jan, you said something really interesting that I think is important. You said who the blame falls on. And a lot of the cultural transformation that makes DevOps possible is us looking at not like individual failure or like who screwed up, but rather like what was the environment that enabled this disaster, this problem to happen, and how do we fix that whole thing rather than, this one thing. And a great example of that is like the Amazon outage, the S3 outage that was caused by some poor soul like doing something that should have been totally routine, and he took down S3. First of all, we've never found out who it was because Amazon didn't tell us and they didn't fire them. And second, Amazon was like, Actually, that was on us because the structure of how we set that up was inevitably going to cause failure. So there isn't like a blame the one person, there's like, look at the system that's causing a problem. And that's such a core DevOps principle that blamelessness and systems thinking go together. I think it's really useful to think about and start performing even on a tiny scale. Like, why didn't I make it to work on time? Well, my cat tripped me and I fell down the stairs with my coffee and I had to go change.
Yeah. Well, you know, the nugget that I'm taking away from this is like, first of all, if you're in a culture that is just crappy, that's going to point the finger and blame you, it's probably not the place to like try new things and do DevOps, right? Like, I mean, and resoundingly, although I do not have the data on this, I would argue that those companies, those command and control companies, in large part over time disappear and sort of dissipate because of the lack of support that they have for build fast and break things mentality, right? So there's that. And then there's also, in that same sort of token, there's a relinquishing of control that comes with like what JJ said and what Jan sort of exemplified, which is like automation requires a certain amount of trust that what you're building and automating is actually doing the thing that you want it to do. And then in comes the other comms things, which are how are we measuring, monitoring, and ensuring that those things are performing as we expected. And all of that sort of has to come in, the culture, the relinquishing of control, but also, you know, acknowledging that automation doesn't actually relinquish your control. It just means a different type of monitoring and sort of addressing that. So I hope I, you know, sort of semi-summarized what people were talking about, because, you know, I'm thinking, yeah, JJ, I see your hand. I'm thinking about the different people on this panel and what each of you do in your individual companies and functions, and it sort of touches on various things: feature flagging, machine identity, you know, what LogDNA does in terms of like your capabilities, and JJ, yours is sort of all encompassing with IBM Cloud, but like, you know, all of those things touch on various components of that. So JJ, over to you.
Well, first of all, Jason, I want to say, yes, you did summarize it extremely well. And I wanted to build on top of a little bit by saying, as much as you think you're walking this journey alone, you're not in a vacuum. There's a whole culture, a whole community of DevOps and developers and operations people who are at different stages of that journey themselves. Reach out to them. Go to the different organizations. Hell, as Jason put together this roundtable right here, and to reiterate, we're all from different portions of the industry that understand how these things all come together. So please, if you're starting this journey, you're not in a vacuum. Learn, look for the other ways you can find stuff, and you'll be amazed on what resources are there.
All right, other comments, and then go ahead, Skylar. Yeah, I'm gonna flip the script in just a couple seconds to get everybody re-engaged and energized. But go ahead, Skylar.
Sorry, just on top of JJ as well. Like, ask questions. Yeah, that's the most important thing. I think someone said it yesterday, and I'm not sure who. It's very okay to not be the smartest person in the room. And most times you want that, right? Like, it's about learning. Like, if somebody knows something that you don't, that's really important. I think also in the chat, someone was saying, let me open it up here. Hold strong opinions, but hold them loosely. That's a really important thing as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, like this was like literally this exact point was like sort of thrown in my face yesterday when y'all started talking about comms. And for those on the, you know, on this Zoom call, we do a very brief, like, how is the thing gonna run sort of call a day prior to these sessions. And Heidi brought up comms, and I'm like, cultural norms? I couldn't hear her. And I was like, comms? And then Lupo was like, shukari. And I speak fluent Japanese. I had never heard of it. So like, I was perfectly comfortable hand raising in that situation and going, I don't know what the hell y'all are talking about. Please tell me. And it gave me a jumping off point actually to learn more about something that I had never really been exposed to before. And I've been in DevOps for a while now. So the fact that I don't know comms, you know, I had a little bit of a, oh shit, how didn't I know this about this? And then, you know, and then I went and learned about it. And now I feel like I understand it a little bit more so than just like saying people, process, tools, right? Which is, you know, sort of the paradigm a lot of people are familiar with. Okay, so I want to switch gears because we've got about 19 minutes left. There are people that are listening to this and that watch these podcasts that are transitioning from traditional IT roles. You know, one of our previous panelists came from an IT ops role. And, you know, they're kind of just wondering, like, what are the, like, you know, we've talked a lot about culture, right? So let's, you know, continue to filter that in, but let's park that for a second. Just in terms of the mechanics of like topics, things that are important, topics that you should go investigate, things like Shukari and comms that I don't know about, right? Like, what are the things that you think are really like sort of pressing or important in the DevOps world, or you know, more fundamental in terms of things that, gosh, you know, we talked about sharing earlier and a culture of sharing. What are some, you know, technologies that enable sharing in a true DevOps culture? You know, I'd like to hear thoughts on that in terms of like, you know, taking a more technical bent on it and things that you think are important. And obviously, like, I expect LaunchDarkly, Venafi, IBM Cloud, and LogDNA and ShuttleOps to be mentioned, but, you know, maybe beyond that, other things as well. Go ahead.
First, read Accelerate. You don't have to read the whole book. You only have to read the first third, but you need to read it because you need to understand the business value of going quickly. I also really loved Project to Product by Mick Kirsten, same publisher. Like this sort of transformational way of thinking about what it is you're trying to accomplish with your team. Because I feel like it's really hard to do a DevOps transformation in a vacuum. And all of these things work together. Like, feature flags are powerful, but they're more powerful if you add observability and the ability to ask questions about how your software is behaving that you didn't think to ask when you were writing logs. And given that, you want to have like workflow management, and given that, you want to, like, they all tie together and they're sort of symbiotically powerful. So I think it's really useful before you start trying to pick a tool to pick a goal or a destination. Like, I want to do one release a day is a goal that I see a lot. Like, one release a day is not continuous integration and continuous delivery, but it is a major transformation for a lot of organizations.
Yeah. Huge. And Heidi, we did have a question. If you could just, I know we're going to post the resources that have been mentioned in today's call, but if you could just articulate which books or resources you just mentioned in your statement, that'd be great.
Do you want me to just type them in the chat?
Yes, go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
Okay, who's raising their hand next?
I can go. Something that Heidi mentioned is important is establishing workflows as well, right? One of the things that we do at ShuttleOps is help you build those workflows that are for your team, focusing on how you can deliver your product, but also how you can be effective in doing that, right? And I again, tooling is necessarily not the most important thing. Like, focusing on your learning, that is really one of the key things, right? If the tool doesn't fit, also, that's important.
Yeah, and I think to that point of goals, right? Like, set goals, and so, right, understanding exactly how you support the greater functions within your organization, I think, is critical. Skylar, you made a great point earlier. Ask questions, right? There are questions to be asked that people may not have even asked, so there may not be an understanding of what the goals are. And so, like, getting everyone on this same page around that, first and foremost, when you start, is super important, because the tools don't can't support an outcome if you don't have an outcome identified, right? By strictly just automating something or using source control or having, centralized, distributed, modern logging, none of that actually matters if you don't have a goal, right? But once you do have a goal, then you understand that the systems are more complicated today than they were, even 5 years ago, right? We're not dealing with simple 3-tier systems. We're dealing with complex multi-dimensional systems. And so like, how are you going to manage the technologies and the challenges you're going to have inherent to implementing the things that actually hit those goals? And like from our perspective, right, having that fast, modern, centralized logging platform to get insight really early on and all through that process is super important, because now what you start to learn when you take that journey, it's not about just I did it in test and it worked and now I'm doing it in production. It's somebody else's problem. There's an ownership, right, that you have all along of that life cycle, and so things like feature flagging is super important, logging is super important, iterative development, distributed source control, all these things are super, super valuable because of how you're going to manage that change all along through the process. And that's where you have the goal, you have the outcome, and then the tools, as you leverage them, inform how you're making progress all along that journey.
I wanted to build on that because I remember when we started making better use of log aggregators, and we went through it, not necessarily in my current role today, but previously, we had an Elasticsearch cluster that we weren't really using too well. It was one of those things, we provisioned it once, we had a lot of noise and we weren't making good use of it. Once we started to make use of it, it's like, as a team, we felt like, okay, now the things that we do, our decisions and implementation are measured, right? And same thing was for Prometheus and Grafana, like to observe our systems. But it was also, what's interesting is that the full stack team started to kind of see how their code was, how their services that they were working on are actually behaving in the wild. Otherwise, it was just a black box, and it was kind of, there's a wall. This is very traditional in many organizations that are siloed. There's a wall, you throw it over. Okay, now we catch it and we deploy, right? So that's not what you want. So those tooling, log aggregators, the time series metrics can actually start to break that wall down. But what's really interesting that I just remembered is that we also, not we, but we were very fortunate that they had an individual that was making their BI tool, like they were using Tableau, and they're making their BI tool like visible for the entire organization. So we could see our end users and how, iteratively that we were, these are S3 related things. Like they were actually able to perform more activities, because now we saw in Grafana that the response time started to go down, right? So things were, those were signs that the app was getting more responsive. But on the BI side, you could actually see there was more activity. And so you could kind of see like the users are working more naturally. So those specific tools for logging, for telematics, and for also BI, those can increase visibility, which is, I guess, the measure. If we go back to columns, this is the measure and the culture aspect, and those can actually effectuate change there.
Yeah, I want Carl to chime in. I want to like just drop in a really amazing point that one of my mentors once gave me, which is, as you become more efficient and free up time for people, you have to make a very purposeful decision about how you redeploy that time, right? In terms of intentional activity to either build new stuff or do certain things. And, that's a very pressing concern for a lot of people in business right now, because we are in an economic downturn, and there are, at least in the US, so many people unemployed. And so, one of the great, offers of DevOps in certain ways is efficiency in your process. And if you can then, redeploy people, train them up, skill them in other things, or get them to do other stuff that you've had on the back burner, like, oh, by the way, that's a really great way to continue accelerating your business that maybe you didn't have a chance to capture before. Right? Because you were too bogged down in the process and the shit of it all. I've used shit now twice in this Now that's 3 times. Okay, I told nobody swearing, and now I'm the only person that's sworn. So I'm gonna now defer to Carl and see what your point is. We'll bleep that out.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, I guess. Sort of, yeah. I mean, I'll use the term repurposing people to sort of do more interesting things with their time. So yeah, I mean, you know, most of our customers now have pretty much said, I mean, because we sort of focus specifically on sort of machine identities, some of the developers, or most of the developers, are sort of saying, look, I never want to see or touch another machine identity. I want to fully automate those machine identities end to end, so I can spend my time doing important things and really focus on building the applications, you know. So the more of that sort of mundane, repetitive stuff you can automate, the better. And that sort of equates to a much more secure infrastructure anyway, because, you know, quite often from our world, the problems with machine identities and the issues associated with them are human based. Yeah, they're human errors all the way through. Yeah, expired certificates, for example, human errors, you know, badly configured certificates that don't match policies, human errors, you know, the fact that developers or humans stand up issuing authorities that they're not really meant to do, more human errors. So all of those things, you can take them out of the process and automate really the hell out of it, and just make that work properly. You guys just save so much time, huge amounts of times. I mean, we've got, you know, calculations. We're not going to bore you with that stuff now, but, you know, there's you know, time you get back to do the stuff that matters, stuff that you can use then to, or time that you can use to generate revenue and create better applications. So,
I'm going to bounce off that and say, don't build your tools. It is so tempting if you have a little space. And I realize I'm a vendor saying this, like, right? But the number of people who say to me, it's just a Boolean, we can build it ourselves, and then end up with like 3 developers dedicated to trying to manage their internal homegrown unupgradable feature flag system.
Absolutely.
It's large.
Or the scripts, right? You know.
Right.
Yeah, and then the support aspect, supporting it over time, the upgrades, the features, the functions. Oh, I need new capabilities because my business does X. All of that just becomes a sunk cost from the build perspective that people just never account for, and it just ends up always being a dead end.
So homegrown, I like to say, is free as in a puppy. Like, yeah, you may get a free puppy, but it's not free.
Walk it and feed it and water it.
Take it to the vet. It's going to chew up some shoes.
That's right.
So, like, yeah, that's the vendor perspective. But also, like, I sell a lot of software to people who built their own and regret it. So don't use your valuable time on anything that doesn't contribute to your core business value.
Yeah. And, you know, and shameless plug here, you know, we do partner very nicely with Venafi, and we do see that use case where, like, why bother with machine identity and certificate management and renewal and all of those things when you can just build it into your pipeline and your deploy process, such that, like, you know, that becomes like this thing that, you know, happens that ensures that you're secure and comfortable with your deployment, and you just don't have to worry about your endpoint. And, you know, I think that's shameless plug over. And who had the next hand raise? And we're about 6 minutes away from conclusion, but I'll let everybody. I'm going to turn it over to final thoughts in a couple minutes. But Carl, you.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, and sort of everything we do. I mean, another part of my role is sort of working in the developer ecosystem. So, for example, you know, what we try not to do is we could get developers to reinvent the wheel, you know, and build, you know, custom solutions around, like, you know, machine identities within these tools, but we don't. The whole point of this whole sort of mission that we're on is to play nicely with the popular tools, the tools that developers like to use. So, you know, things like, you know, Share, Puppet, so all of those sort of tool chains that they already use. But then, you know, if we get into the depths of, you know, things like Kubernetes, you know, let's look at what the community does to manage identities in Kubernetes. Let's look at those tools and techniques and things, and let's build on those. You know, rather than trying to sort of build something that you know, that's proprietary to us and then push that upon developers. So that's where we try to go with everything we do. So, you know, reduce that friction and make it easy and nice for developers to just adopt, because they're already doing it anyway to a large extent.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I want to reemphasize, like, there's a really great other thread that's sort of wound through this, which is this notion of community. And if you are new in DevOps or even development, or gosh, even in a technology stack, you know, if you're not engaged in those Slack communities, in those LinkedIn communities, in any of the communities on any of the platforms, we'll try to share some of those as well. But, you know, the point that was just made is, like, don't make it homegrown. Like, open source is a great way to find out people that are like-minded, solving similar problems, to engage with them. And oh, by the way, like, if your company is not like necessarily like really get what you do, and you go find an open source solution for it and you vet it out and it works for you, you know, that's just an accelerator, your performance enhancement, right? Like, it's a performance enhancing drug, right? Like, I'll call open source that. Like, it's a way of tapping into people who've solved a similar problem prior to you that you can, you know, sort of utilize as the baseline for you, you know, sort of executing something similar. And so I think that's, you know, engage with your community would be, you know, another thing that I would say. So we're about 4 minutes away. So I'm going to call on people again and just, you know, for some final thoughts, one by one. Again, DevOps 101, back to basics. First of all, thank you all. Thanks for everybody who's attended. But any final thoughts? I'm going to start, JJ, with you, and just kind of see if you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for joining the community. Believe it or not, you're already in the DevOps community. You just didn't realize it. By us having this conversation, you've already taken your first step. And please reach out to us. Like, that's what we do. This is who we are. Join us. We have cookies.
Not like the browser cookies, but like literal cookies. Okay, got it. Okay, Jan, let's go over to you.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for joining. So whether or not you're further into the DevOps journey, whether or not you're in a DevOps role currently, or you might want to transition to it, and whether or not you feel like the organization you're in today is going to take in this journey easily, or you're going to feel a bit of resistance, my number one advice is just go ahead. Like, don't be afraid to experiment. Maybe not experiment with your production system, but don't be afraid to go home and make a very simple pipeline. Put your credit card on AWS and just, you know, create configurations in Terraform, because the pain points that you're going to face is going to be your number one asset when communicating with other people, so that you can convey, you know, your solution to problems within the organization. And you need to experiment with that pain first. You have to fail first in order to succeed personally and have your organization succeed. So experiment.
Yep. Heidi.
DevOps is full of really nice people. Of all the communities that I deal with, I love DevOps people. There are a ton of resources. It's been going for over a decade, and I think you will find that walking into it is sort of like walking into a very friendly bar where we're like, yeah, cookies and chats, and we're not here to judge you. We're all people who remember starting this journey. It's going to be good. It's going to be fun.
One of the most welcoming communities I've ever been a part of, to be honest. And I really do feel that way. You know, so I love that everybody's saying that. Skylar, over to you.
I just have one small quote that's like really weighing in on me. Journey of 1,000 miles begins with first step.
Good.
That's it.
Okay, Carl.
I think you guys have pretty much said most of it. So all I can say or add to it is, you know, just go out and do it, and, you know, roll up your sleeves and get stuck into it, and, you know, learn. It's fun. I mean, I don't do it all of my time. I dabble in my, because I don't get time to practice it sort of professionally, because I'm sort of working with a vendor. But when I do spend time doing it, the tools and the technologies and the speed of, you know, evolution is fun and phenomenal. It's great.
That's awesome, Carl. Thank you. And Lupo, finally over to you.
So reiterating everyone what said, the community is a powerful community. DevOps is not just a portmanteau between Dev and Ops. It's our collective experiences in the systems that we've managed and how we manage them previously, how we manage them today. It's a welcoming community. My kind of parting shot or take is for leaders and managers that are out there, walk a mile in your people's shoes, get to understand what they do on a day-to-day. If you don't have that already, bring empathy and vulnerability to the table and ask questions on how you can make them better, how you can unblock them, how you can basically empower them. For me, Jason, you made the point earlier, these organizations that have this top-down, very rigid structure, I agree with you, they're going to fall away at some point. And I think the people that are kind of installed in these organizations are going to have to learn, just like we learned as DevOps practitioners that we had to learn and iterate and improve. I think leadership is going to have to learn, iterate, and improve. So that would be my kind of take on that as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Lupo. Great points. So first and foremost, thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to all of our attendees. This is the end of our session. Reminder, next one is on October 23rd. I'd love to have everybody back here. And with that, thank you very much for your time. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, and we'll see you all soon.